Okay, and we're back. So, we set up our missiles in the previous tutorial and we got them to fit inside an array. So we have a collection, we know how many missiles are on screen at any point in time. But the problem is, from the previous tutorial, we had like 105 missiles on the stage. Now obviously, they're all sitting up here outside of the stage and they're still taking up memory. So what we need to do is we really need to kill them off after they leave the top of the stage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to our first game class, and in our game loop I'm going to just create a new function, and we're going to test if a missile leaves the top of the stage. So let's call this function check missiles off screen. Yeah, that'll do, and let's create that function. So what we need to do in here is we need to loop through all our missiles that we currently have on screen. So we need to set up a for loop to do that. And we're going to test each missile as soon as we get to it in that for loop, and we're going to check if it's off the top of the stage. Let's go ahead and destroy it. So let's loop through all our missiles in our missile array. Loop. So let's set up a for loop to do that. So I'm going to start off by saying for, and then we're going to set up a new variable which is going to be our counter object. Now you can call a counter object whatever you want, but in most programming books and especially online you'll see a lot of people calling the first counter I. So just think of I as counter object. You can even call it counter object in your mind if you want. And we're going to data type that to an integer, and it's going to start off at 0. Then the next thing we need in our for loop is the condition. So if our counter object is less than our missile array dot length, so if 0 is less than however many missiles we have in our length, keep running the loop over and over. And our last condition is let's add 1 to our counter object. So what happens at the end of a loop with our counter object? Let's add 1 to it. So I++ is the same as saying I equals I plus 1. So it's just shortcut code once again. So this loop is going to keep running over and over, all the code that we put in between these two curly brackets. It's going to keep running over and over and over until 0, or our counter object, is no longer less than our array length. So however many elements we have in our array. So first thing we do is in our for loop, let's get the current missile in the loop. Then we want to test if our current missile, so we're just interested in one missile at the moment, if that missile is above the top of the screen, then let's destroy it. So let's test if our current missile is past the top of the screen. And then finally in that test we're going to destroy our missile, and we no longer need it in the array. So actually let's take it out of the array first. So remove our current missile from the array. So let's start off by getting the current missile in the loop. So I'm going to set up a new variable to hold our current missile, and we'll just call it current missile as the variable name. And this is going to be a missile object, so it's going to be our MC missile class that we set up. And to get an object from an array, we're going to specify which array we're talking about, so our missile array, and what position, so what little tackle box coordinate, or which box do we want. So we're going to get it wherever our counter is up to. So at the start, a counter is going to equal 0, so we'll grab it from the first position in our tackle box. Our counter is going to equal 1 after we finish the first instance of it, so it's going to get our missile in the next tackle box section, and so on until we get all of our missiles in our array. So now let's test if our current missile is past the top of the screen. So if our current missile, if its Y position, if that's less than 0, so remember back in our Photoshop document, it's 0, 0 up here, so Y at this point up here is 0. So if we're less than 0 up here, that's where we want to get rid of our missile. So if we're less than 0, let's remove our missile from the array. So a missile array. And to remove an element from an array, we use the method called splice. And we want to get rid of the missile at our counter's position. So our counter position is I inside the loop, and we just want to get rid of one object from there. And I'll set up another tutorial on arrays, like we'll set up a demo array tutorial, and I'll link it, and I'll put a little link down the bottom with the YouTube comments. So check that out if arrays still seem a little bit out there for you. And finally, we need to destroy our missile. So we can just remove the missile from the stage, but let's set up a removal process which is a little bit more elegant than this. So let's go into our MC missile, and I did say I wanted to talk about the difference between public and private functions, so this is where it's going to happen. Just for an example, let's down the bottom of our missile loop, let's set up two functions. Let's set up a private function called test1, and that's not going to return anything. And let's set up a public function called test2. So we'll delete these in a sec, but just for an example. So whenever we're inside a class of an object, we can access public and private functions, or methods as they're called inside a class. So just say up the top here in our in our initialize function, if I wanted to call upon these functions, I get test1 and test2 showing up as code completion in Flash Develop. So that means they're both accessible in here. Now outside of a class, let's go back to our first game. So we're getting our current missile here. So if I talk to my current missile and I try to access test, I only get test2 showing up. Test1 doesn't show up because it's a private function. It's available only to its basically family. So this private function will only show up and be accessible in our missile class. Whereas a public function can be accessed and talked to from an outside class, like first game. That's why we only get test2 showing up here. So that's the difference between private and public. So let's delete that and get rid of these two functions. So I hope that made sense. If it didn't, chuck a message in the YouTube comments. So let's set up a public function here called destroy missile. It's not going to return anything, so I'll set it up as void. So this function we can call upon in our first game function, in our first game class. And when we call upon it, we want it to destroy this current missile. So to destroy a missile, or to destroy any object, we need to do two things. We need to obviously remove the object from the stage or its container. So you don't always have to attach objects to the stage. You can attach them to a movie clip or another sprite, for example. But in this case, let's just remove our object from the stage. And finally, let's remove any event listeners that may be still running. So in this case, our enter frame is going to still be running, so let's get rid of that. So remove our object from the stage. Now remember, this object is attached to the stage. So the stage, you can think of it as its parent, because we add a child to our stage like we did in the first game. So let's talk to its parent and remove the child, this, because this missile is going to be removed. And then finally, let's remove any event listeners. So let's remove our event listener from enter frame. And the function we want to remove is called missile loop. Let's get rid of that. So here's our little destroy function method, and it's a public method. So in our first game, where we need to destroy our current missile, let's access our current missile and then say destroy missile. So to see if this works, if we keep hitting spacebar to fire our missiles, before we were getting almost 105 missiles on screen. So now we should be getting a lot less because they automatically kill themselves off. So let's test this, and you can see here I'm keeping spacebar mashed down, and we're only getting about 8 missiles on screen. So as soon as they leave the top of the screen, they're getting destroyed. So our game's a little bit more optimized now. It's going to work a little bit better. Okay, so I think that'll do it for this missile tutorial. In the next set of tutorials, we're going to set up our enemies. So we're going to get them to spawn either at a random location on the screen, so either on the left side or the right side, at a random altitude, and we're going to pick a random enemy to come out as well. So there's going to be a lot to that tutorial. So yeah, stay tuned for that one.